Hello, I'm David Porteous, and we're talking today about reuse, repair, and recycle. And with me are Chris Hellawell, who is the founder and director of the Edinburgh Tool Library. Hi, Chris.
Morning.
And also Billie Dunleviewood, who is the events coordinator for the SHRUB Co-op.
Morning.
Hi, Billie. So, thinking about maybe more, I don't know if I want to see more complex projects, but certainly things that would fall into sort of the repair side rather than, everyday DIY, moving into repairing things. What's the most common repair that you actually get people coming in with, looking for tools or help or advice or anything like that in relation to?
In Scotland, the most common thing is coming in to borrow a plane to take a little sliver off the bottom of a door because the rain's caused it to swell up. And that is quite a classic thing. I would say 50% of any sort of plane that we lend out, will be for that purpose. So things like that. A lot of people fixing upholstery. There's an awful lot of folks, finding things in the street. I'm sure as a representative of the council, there's people sticking stuff by the bin and hoping that someone's going to take it away. And a lot of the time it is our members, and they turn up and they need something to strip the paint, a heat gun or there's a perfectly usable chair that's the padding needs repaired, so they maybe just need some tacks and sort of reupholster that. And there's so much on YouTube and out there in terms of sort of support for simple repairs and simple jobs that we can do that. And then there's things like gardening tools, sharpening and sort of sometimes you have people coming in, they borrow a metal vise for 5 minutes and they just bend their fork back into alignment.
We'll give the people of Edinburgh very much the benefit of the doubt in saying that they're putting things beside their bin in the hope that they will be reused by some well-meaning person. Yeah, that's definitely why they're doing it. Billie, you mentioned the making aspects of SHRUB Co-op. What does that involve?
So we run a series of workshops where people can make stuff. We have a couple of volunteers who they both run a weekly sewing session, so they run every Thursday and Tuesday, and they used to be in our lovely space where we have lots of sewing machines and lots of needles and like bits of textile and everything that people could use, and then they would just get taught. Like they could come into the space with no experience whatsoever, and our volunteers would take them through the process. If they had an idea or if they just wanted to learn some skills, they can come and do that. At the moment it's all on Zoom. So our volunteers have had to get very tech savvy and they're like holding things up to cameras, but like they're getting there and people learn how to make things and it's really satisfying. But in addition to that, we just run other workshops if somebody has an idea that they want to do it, because we are a co-op that's volunteer led. If they're like, we think it would be really useful that people could learn how to do this thing, then we'll try to run a workshop on it if we have because that's what keeps us ever evolving and learning and changing and stuff.
What sort of projects, what sort of scale of projects are people sort of attempting with this? What's the typical thing that you'd see someone coming in and saying, I'm joining because I have this ambition to make this particular thing?
In the sewing sections?
Yeah.
Honestly, there isn't a typical. I don't think there is a typical person that comes to the sessions. It's so varied. Sometimes it'll be someone that just wants to fix a zip or sew a seam, but we've also had someone be like, I want to make my wedding dress. So it really varies. Sometimes it's just technical things. Somebody's like, oh, I inherited this sewing machine from my granny, but I don't know how to do it. So our volunteers will take them through the process of how to set up the thread and what the foot does and the different levers, and then that's brilliant to me because then they have those skills, and who knows how much environmental impact that's going to have, because they can continue to save things and mend things and make things going forward.
So, I mean, the environmental impacts of fashion are one of the things that we're, you know, that should be of a lot of concern to us, especially disposable fashion items. Now, we've all been wearing the same things for the last 9 months because nobody's been going anywhere. But otherwise, there's a lot of disposable fashion that's out there. What really what should people be thinking about in terms of making sort of fashion choices like that? What sort of other alternatives do they have to your? Chris has been very deliberate in not naming particular organizations, but I'll say, what are the alternatives to H&M? What are the alternatives to some of those high fashion, maybe more disposable chains?
Yeah, well, I think this is an issue that isn't super straightforward, because there is the economic barriers. There are eco-fashion makers out there, but the reality is that for a lot of people who perhaps are living on like a weekly benefit, for example, they're never going to have enough money to buy a pair of jeans that has been like environmentally sourced and handmade and that cost, say, £100. So I think there's a lot to be thought about in terms of fast fashion, but I think we've come quite a long way in removing stigma from charity shopping. I think a lot of people charity shop now because it's cool, not because they just see it as a poor person's choice, which is ace. And yeah, I think learning to repair, I think if we taught kids in primary school how to darn a sock or how to fix a seam or how to make their clothes last as long as possible, that would be great, because people would do it and it wouldn't have to be something they'd come to later on. Yeah, I think it's a really complex one.
So when we had some of our initial conversations with the Edinburgh Public, one of the things that surprised me, this was at the very beginning of this year, one of the things that surprised me was how attitudes towards charity shops had changed radically over the past 20, 30 years, I think. So there was definitely a lot of stigma for people my generation, I think, growing up about using that. And that seems to have almost entirely vanished. So if you like, how do we get people to do that, exactly as you're suggesting? How do we get kids now to see using previously loved items as being not just normal but desirable, because often they might be better quality because they've already endured someone having them for a certain amount of time? How do we bridge that gap and make that normal, rather than just using your Amazon app to order whatever it is you want?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is in education. Like if we introduce sharing of clothes, even just like a uniform bank at primary schools, for example, that is completely destigmatized but is seen as just the right and nice and fun thing to do, then, and we talk about the environmental impact, we talk about how we all need a planet, and if we keep these things lasting longer, then it's just going to become a habitual way of interacting to kids, and then to young people, and then to adults who are going to have more children. You know, it'll be a cyclical situation where we just change our attitudes to how we consume textile, and how we consume everything, preferably. Like, I think the idea of sharing, it's so brilliant for the environment, and it's brilliant for us because we feel good about it. It's nice to share with each other, and it's nice to give things into a charity shop and know that you're contributing to something that's not fast fashion, that isn't just filling up landfills, that isn't putting money in the pockets of people who are then exploiting other people. So yeah, I think educational intervention, like just slight shifts in how we do things, would be a good way to do it.
I think. Sorry, I was just going to say. I think also I think younger generations, you know, sort of people sort of student age now, I think they already get it. I think it's you know, the older generation, my generation and above, that you know, without wanting to get too political, but you know, the children of the Thatcher era governments, you know, the sort of brought up on capitalism. I think that status comes with buying and ownership, and it's a demonstration of how well you're doing by what you've got. And I think you know, there's a certain amount of hypocrisy, certainly when I was growing up, that you know, the message of sharing is caring was always rammed down your throat as a child, and children get that, you know, like they understand that. It's when they, you know, suddenly they have their 18th birthday and right, it's like, right, stop sharing, you know, grab as much as you can, you know, get your flashiest car that you possibly can. And it's actually more about, it's either about re-educating us older folks, or it's about, you know, we're not going to be around as long as the younger ones. So hopefully that attitude will you know, leave with us. But I think certainly from our perspective at the Tool Library, we're you know, we're sort of, you know, not, fighting against the system that's built to tell people that they do need to, you know, when, you know, I'll fully admit this, when we started, my dad said, do you want a drill? And I said, what do you mean? Like, are you going to give me a drill? And he said, well, I've got 5 and 3 of them are still in the boxes. And that was so that he could tell his mates at the golf club that he got a new drill, you know, because there was status attached. And you know, it's not because he needed 5 drills. And until we as a society get away from that kind of attitude, and I actually think I'm less worried about, you know, the younger people are, I'm more hopeful. And it's actually those of us who still were brought up being told that more and bigger is you know, is better.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. What we see from something like the Scottish Household Survey is that over a period of 5 years, the number of 16 to 24-year-olds who are very concerned about the environment doubled, essentially. Now, that rate has gone up, but not so much even for people of all ages. But where there's maybe a disconnect still is understanding that those individuals are currently exhibiting behaviors every single day which are having negative environmental impacts, and consumption like that is probably one of those things where we need to do a little bit more to break down that perception. Thanks very much to Chris. Thank you, Chris, and thank you very much to Billie for taking part in this discussion today, and thank you for listening.